CHAPTER 23 of the Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elaine Tweddle. The Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu by Sax Rohmer. Chapter 23 A Cry on the Moor. Of the events intervening between this moment and that when death called to us out of the night, I have the haziest recollections. An excellent dinner was served in the bleak and gloomy dining room by the mulatto, and the crippled author was carried to the head of the table by this same Herculean attendant as lightly as though he had but the weight of a child. Van Roon talked continuously, revealing a deep knowledge of all sorts of obscure matters, and in the brief intervals Nayland Smith talked also with almost feverish rapidity. Plans for the future were discussed. I can recall no one of them. I could not stifle my queer sentiments in regard to the mulatto, and every time I found him behind my chair I was hard put to repress a shudder. In this fashion the strange evening passed, and to the accompaniment of distant, muttering thunder, we two guests retired to our chambers in Cragmire Tower. Smith had contrived to give me my instructions in a whisper, and 5 minutes after entering my own room I had snuffed the candles, slipped a wedge, which he had given me, under the door, crept out through the window onto the guttered ledge, and joined Smith in his room. He, too, had extinguished his candles, and the place was in darkness. As I climbed in, he grasped my wrist to silence me, and turned me forcibly toward the window. "Listen," he said. I turned and looked out upon a prospect which had been a fit setting for the witch scene in Macbeth. Thunderclouds hung low over the moor, but through them ran a sort of chasm or rift, allowing a bar of lurid light to stretch across the drear, from east to west, a sort of lane walled by darkness. There came a remote murmuring as of a troubled sea, a hushed and distant chorus, and sometimes in upon it broke the drums of heaven. In the west lightning flickered, though but faintly, intermittently. Then came the call. Out of the blackness of the moor it came, wild and distant. "Help! Help!" "Smith!" I whispered. "What is it? What?" "Mr. Smith!" came the agonized cry. "Nayland Smith! Help! For God's sake!" "Quick, Smith!" I cried. "Quick, man! It's Van Roon! He's been dragged out! They are murdering him!" Nayland Smith held me in a vice-like grip, silent, unmoved. Louder and more agonized came the cry for aid, and I became more than ever certain that it was poor Van Roon who uttered it. "Mr. Smith! Dr. Petrie! For God's sake come! Or it will be too late!" "Smith!" I said, turning furiously upon my friend, "if you are going to remain here whilst murder is done, I am not." My blood boiled now with hot resentment. It was incredible, inhuman, that we should remain there inert, whilst a fellow man, and our host to boot, was being done to death out there in the darkness. I exerted all my strength to break away, but although my efforts told upon him, as his loud breathing revealed, Nayland Smith clung to me tenaciously. Had my hands been free, in my fury I could have struck him, for the pitiable cries, growing fainter, now told their own tale. Then Smith spoke, shortly and angrily, breathing hard between the words. "Be quiet, you fool!" he snapped. "It's little less than an insult, Petrie, to think me capable of refusing help where help is needed." Like a cold douche his words acted. In that instant I knew myself a fool. "You remember the call of Siva?" he said, thrusting me away irritably. "2 years ago, and what it meant to those who obeyed it?" "You might have told me." "Told you? You would have been through the window before I'd uttered 2 words." I realized the truth of his assertion, and the justness of his anger. "Forgive me, old man," I said, very crestfallen, "and my impulse was a natural one, you'll admit. You must remember that I've been trained never to refuse aid when aid is asked." "Shut up, Petrie!" he growled. "Forget it." The cries had ceased now entirely, and a peal of thunder, louder than any yet, echoed over distant Sedgemoor. A chasm of light splitting the heavens closed in, leaving the night wholly black. "Don't talk!" rapped Smith. "Act! You wedged your door?" "Yes." "Good. Get into that cupboard, have your Browning ready, and keep the door very slightly ajar." He was in that mood of repressed fever which I knew, and which always communicated itself to me. I spoke no further word, but stepped into the wardrobe indicated, and drew the door nearly shut. The recess just accommodated me, and through the aperture I could see the bed, vaguely, the open window, and part of the opposite wall. I saw Smith cross the floor as a mighty clap of thunder boomed over the house. A gleam of lightning flickered through the gloom. I saw the bed for a moment, distinctly, and it appeared to me that Smith lay therein, with the sheets pulled up over his head. The light was gone, and I could hear big drops of rain pattering upon the leaden gutter below the open window. My mood was strange, detached, and characterized by vagueness. That Van Roon lay dead upon the moor I was convinced, and, although I recognized that it must be a sufficient one, I could not even dimly divine the reason why we had refrained from lending him aid. To have failed to save him, knowing his peril, would have been bad enough; to have refused, I thought, was shameful. Better to have shared his fate. Yet the downpour was increasing, and beating now a regular tattoo upon the gutterway. Then, splitting the oblong of greater blackness which marked the casement, quivered dazzlingly another flash of lightning, in which I saw the bed again, with that impression of Smith curled up in it. The blinding light died out. Came the crash of thunder, harsh and fearsome, more imminently above the tower than ever. The building seemed to shake. Coming as they did, horror and the wrath of Heaven together, suddenly, crashingly, black and angry after the fairness of the day, these happenings and their settings must have terrorized the stoutest heart. But somehow I seemed detached, as I have said, and set apart from the whirl of events, a spectator. Even when a vague yellow light crept across the room from the direction of the door and flickered unsteadily on the bed, I remained unmoved to a certain degree, although passively alive to the significance of the incident. I realized that the ultimate issue was at hand, but either because I was emotionally exhausted or from some other cause, the pending climax failed to disturb me. Going on tiptoe, in stockinged feet, across my field of vision, past Kegan Van Roon! He was in his shirt sleeves and held a lighted candle in one hand, whilst with the other he shaded it against the draught from the window. He was a cripple no longer, and the smoked glasses were discarded. Most of the light, at the moment when I first saw him, shone upon his thin olive face, and at sight of his eyes much of the mystery of Cragmire Tower was resolved. For they were oblique, very slightly, but nevertheless unmistakably oblique. Though highly educated, and possibly an American citizen, Van Roon was a Chinaman. Upon the picture of his face as I saw it then I do not care to dwell. It lacked the unique horror of Dr. Fu-Manchu's unforgettable countenance, but possessed a sort of animal malignancy which the latter lacked. He approached within 3 or 4 feet of the bed, peering, then, with a timidity which spoke well for Nayland Smith's reputation, paused and beckoned to someone who evidently stood in the doorway behind him. As he did so, I noted that the legs of his trousers were caked with greenish-brown mud nearly up to the knees. The huge mulatto, silent-footed, crossed to the bed in 3 strides. He was stripped to the waist, and excepting some few professional athletes, I had never seen a torso to compare with that which, brown and glistening, now bent over Nayland Smith. The muscular development was simply enormous. The man had a neck like a column, and the thews around his back and shoulders were like ivy tentacles wreathing some gnarled oak. Whilst Van Roon, his evil gaze upon the bed, held the candle aloft, the mulatto, with a curious preparatory writhing movement of the mighty shoulders, lowered his outstretched fingers to the disordered bed linen. I pushed open the cupboard door and thrust out the Browning. As I did so, a dramatic thing happened. A tall, gaunt figure shot suddenly upright from the bed. It was Nayland Smith. Upraised in his hand he held a heavy walking cane. I knew the handle to be leaded, and I could judge of the force with which he wielded it by the fact that it cut the air with a keen, swishing sound. It descended upon the back of the mulatto's skull with a sickening thud, and the great brown body dropped inert upon the padded bed, in which not Smith but his grip reposed. There was no word, no cry. Then, "Shoot, Petrie! Shoot the fiend! Shoot!" Van Roon, dropping the candle, in the falling gleam of which I saw the whites of the oblique eyes, turned and leaped from the room with the agility of a wild cat. The ensuing darkness was split by a streak of lightning, and there was Nayland Smith scrambling around the foot of the bed and making for the door in hot pursuit. We gained it almost together. Smith had dropped the cane and now held his pistol in his hand. Together we fired into the chasm of the corridor, and in a flash saw Van Roon hurling himself down the stairs. He went silently in his stockinged feet, and our own clatter was drowned by the awful booming of the thunder which now burst over us again. Crack, crack, crack! 3 times our pistols spat venomously after the flying figure. Then we had crossed the hall below and were in the wilderness of the night with the rain descending upon us in sheets. Vaguely I saw the white shirt sleeves of the fugitive near the corner of the stone fence. A moment he hesitated, then darted away inland, not toward Saul, but toward the moor and the cup of the inland bay. "Steady, Petrie, steady!" cried Nayland Smith. He ran, panting, beside me. "It is the path to the mire." He breathed sibilantly between every few words. "It was out there that he hoped to lure us, with a cry for help." A great blaze of lightning illuminated the landscape as far as the eye could see. Ahead of us a flying shape, hair lank and glistening in the downpour, followed a faint path skirting that green tongue of morass which we had noted from the upland. It was Kegan Van Roon. He glanced over his shoulder, showing a yellow, terror-stricken face. We were gaining upon him. Darkness fell, and the thunder cracked and boomed as though the very moor were splitting about us. "Another 50 yards, Petrie," breathed Nayland Smith, "and after that it's uncharted ground." On we went through the rain and the darkness. Then slow up, cried Smith. "It feels soft." Indeed, already I had made one false step, and the hungry mire had fastened upon my foot, almost tripping me. "Lost the path!" We stopped dead. The falling rain walled us in. I dared not move, for I knew that the mire, the devouring mire, stretched eager close about my feet. We were both waiting for the next flash of lightning, I think, but, before it came, out of the darkness ahead of us rose a cry that sometimes rings in my ears to this hour. Yet it was no more than a repetition of that which had called to us deathfully a while before. "Help! Help! For God's sake, help! Quick! I am sinking!" Nayland Smith grasped my arm furiously. "We dare not move, Petrie, we dare not move," he breathed. "It's God's justice, visible for once." Then came the lightning, and, ignoring a splitting crash behind us, we both looked ahead, over the mire. Just on the edge of the venomous green path, not 30 yards away, I saw the head and shoulders and upstretched, appealing arms of Van Roon. Even as the lightning flickered and we saw him, he was gone, with one last long drawn-out cry, horribly like the mournful wail of a seagull. He was gone. That eerie light died, and in the instant before the sound of the thunder came shatteringly, we turned about, in time to see Cragmire Tower, a blacker silhouette against the night, topple and fall. A red glow began to be perceptible above the building. The thunder came booming through the caverns of space. Nayland Smith lowered his wet face close to mine and shouted in my ear: "Kegan Van Roon never returned from China. It was a trap. Those were 2 creatures of Dr. Fu-Manchu." The thunder died away, hollowly, echoing over the distant sea. "That light on the moor tonight?" "You have not learned Morse code, Petrie. It was a signal, and it read SMITH SOS." "Well?" "I took the chance, as you know, and it was Karamaneh. She knew of the plot to bury us in the mire. She had followed us from London, but could do nothing until dusk. God forgive me if I've misjudged her, for we owe her our lives tonight." Flames were bursting up from the building beside the ruin of the ancient tower, which had faced the storms of countless ages, only to succumb at last. The lightning literally had cloven it in twain. "The mulatto?" Again the lightning flashed, and we saw the path and began to retrace our steps. Nayland Smith turned to me, and his face was very grim in that unearthly light, and his eyes shone like steel. "I killed him, Petrie, as I meant to do." From out over Sedgemoor it came, cracking and rolling and booming towards us, swelling in volume to a stupendous climax, that awful laughter of Jove, the destroyer of Cragmire Tower. Chapter 24. Recording by Elaine Tweddle, Stirling, Ontario.